Okay, welcome to my session. Depending on the time zone you're in, good morning, good afternoon, and in Austria you say Mahlzeit if it's around lunchtime. So I'd like to talk to you about how you can get control of your documents flying around in Teams and SharePoint when you start adopting Teams more and more over time. A few event slides. So there's the SharePoint, the Microsoft 365 collaboration conference coming up in next year in Las Vegas. Make sure that you register early so you get the great discounts. Also, please reach out to one of our great sponsors that can help you optimize your business processes, hopefully, and give you insights on what they do. Also, there is a raffle. Make sure that you can take part so you can win a Oculus 3 Quest all-in-one. Check out the link to sign up to be able to win it. The event is also supporting community relief, so also make sure that you have a look at their sites. 10% of our sponsoring funds will go towards these organizations. A little bit to myself. My name is Melanie Culver. I'm a consultant and solution architect for Microsoft 365. I've been doing this for a while now, over 15 years. I try to help organizations move more to Microsoft 365, Azure, and all the cloud stack that Microsoft provides. I work for an international organization based in Vienna. I also live in Vienna, and I'm part Austrian, part British, but I've always lived in Austria. Okay, let's start on this session. So I want to talk to you about what are the pain points when we talk about document management in Teams and SharePoint. I think it's good to get an understanding how the systems work behind the scenes to understand all the implications when you use the technology. And then I want to show you how you can improve your experience when it comes to document management within the tool set. And for the Debbie part, there's of course some automation scripts that help you improve your overall experience. So what are the pain points? You have tons and tons of documents flying around all over the place, and it's really hard to find the needle in the haystack. So you're always constantly looking for documents, at least definitely I am. I don't know, a lot of my colleagues are as well. So we have to find a possibility to improve the way we work to be able to find what we're looking for. And I know everyone who's a SharePoint consultant has been preaching this forever. If you capture metadata, it's a lot easier to find your documents, but I guarantee you no one does it, not even myself. I don't practice what I preach, but this is something I think can always benefit if we actually do it. And we also have the issue that when you create new documents, you have no clue where to put them. There's so many places, everyone works differently. Every project manager structures their file structure differently. So where do I put the stuff and how do I find my stuff because it's in a different location, always structured differently. And also on the long run, we have to think about legal implications. And if we can't find documents, we run into trouble. But also when we come to document management and cloud, there's also nice functionality for record keeping. We won't cover it, but I think it's very helpful if you structure your documents properly to do record keeping in a far easier way. And also, when you start moving things around from file system to the cloud or moving one team to another team, joining them because you have multiple teams, there are also some considerations you should take when you do those transitions. So how do the things actually work behind the scene? What is SharePoint? What is Teams? We also have to cover what is OneDrive, just to be clear how the experience is. So in the middle, you have Teams. Teams is more or less a technology hub integrating several different other Office 365 services, Microsoft 365 services. And it's very important to differentiate between the chat, so it's more or less one-to-one communication or one to a small group, and the channeled communication, because the documents you share there are stored in very different locations. So if you upload a document in a one-on-one chat, it's actually stored in your personal OneDrive and shared with the other collaborators in your chat. So you're still basically technically the owner of that document. When we talk about channels and you upload documents in channels, these are actually stored in SharePoint. So as you might probably know, is that behind Teams, there's always a SharePoint site collection created for you. And for every channel you have, there is a folder in a specific document library, the shared documents. So every channel you create, there's a new folder created in SharePoint. And now when you upload a document in the channel, or you forward an email to that channel, it is actually stored within SharePoint. The reason why I also tell you this, and this is important because I've stumbled across this in the past. You start to chat with a person, you share a document, and at some point you think, okay, I've received this document from a person through the chat, I want to share this as well. Because I'm not the owner, I can't really pass on that permissions. But let me show you here what that means. So there are different permission models when it comes to OneDrive document sharing, Teams, and SharePoint. For OneDrive, so when I upload a document, I'm the owner, it's in my OneDrive. And when I decide to share it, because I upload in the chat, people can read it or can write it. And the permissions are set on file level. And as I mentioned, if I try to share a document someone else shared it with me, it will not work. You'll have to ask the original owner to share it as well. Or actually, ideally, it should have gone in the channel in the first place. But that's open for discussion. The permission model for Teams is that there are 3 different roles. You can be an owner of a team, so you basically have full control of your team. You can be a member, where you have, depending on what the owner configures, permissions to chat, to upload documents, create new channels, and things like that. And there are also this role of guests. And basically, the level you can set the permissions is on team level and on channel level. And these permissions that you set in Teams actually also reflect in SharePoint. So by default, all the owners will have site collection admin permissions, and all the members will have contribute permissions in SharePoint. But when we just look at SharePoint itself and ignore the Teams part, we're back in our classic SharePoint collaboration experience where we have the roles we want to have. By default, we have full control, read, edit, contribute, but you can still create all your roles you want. I know that Microsoft is slowly but surely at least hiding them in the user interface, but they're still there. And when it comes to where you are able to set permissions, there are many different locations. So you can set your permissions on file level, on team level, on file level, on document library level, on site collection level. So this is the most flexible option you have. So it's important to understand that depending on how you share, where you share, you have overlaps on where permissions are set. So Teams has an impact on SharePoint permissions. SharePoint has an impact on Teams permissions. So you have the possibility in SharePoint to actually lock down permissions for certain folders. So you can say, okay, I've created this team. There's a document in my channel which no one should have access to. You can set the permissions in SharePoint, and that person will not be able to see that anymore, except, and that's very important, for the owner. So when you set permissions in SharePoint, the owner, because it's site collection admin, will always see everything. So again, be very aware of who is owner of your team, because it has an impact on how your document management works in SharePoint. Another thing to think about when it comes to document management is the topic of sharing, because it also has an impact on how you collaborate on documents. So if you're already part of a team and you share a link, the system detects, okay, you already has permissions, and it just sends out the link, depending on where in the user interface you share in SharePoint or Teams. What happens is if you don't have access to a document yet, and you type in the name of a person, SharePoint actually sets permissions on the file or the folder, and then sends out this link. So there's another layer that SharePoint has introduced where you set permissions. And of course, you still always have the option of going directly into SharePoint, fiddling around with permissions, and then just grab out that link and just forward it in a straight normal email. So there are different levels where you can actually change permissions to be able to access documents. And as I mentioned, you can revoke permissions in SharePoint, but the person can still have access to Teams. So let's say you go into SharePoint and say, he's not allowed to see the documents XYZ in the document library. He will still be able to work in Teams. And under the Files tab, you will just not see the documents. The other way around as well. If you have an external person who should be able to access a specific document, but he shouldn't be able to access Teams, you can grant that person permissions in SharePoint, but he won't see that team in his Teams. And as I mentioned, the team owner always sees everything. That has been a nice surprise once in a while. On the topic of metadata, yes, as I mentioned, it is great to have metadata if people capture it, but it's not always the case. And I'll show you how you can at least set default metadata to get a far better user experience for people to be able to find their documents. So these are the options you have when it comes to improving your document management. Basically, there are two parts to this. One part is changing your process. Think about, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Do you want to let everyone create teams through a self-service approach? Or do you want to have a more moderated version to say you have to go to a central, in the example I'll show you, to a SharePoint list, request a new site, and for either you have an approval process to say, yes, you're allowed to have the team, blah, 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 or you just have a technical process, and this is where then part 2 comes into play, that provisions you the team and presets a lot of configuration that will then help you in the long run to better be able to cope with your document management. So I think there are always two parts when it comes to document management. You have to make sure that you have the right processes, understand your business case, to then be able to leverage technology to improve the overall experience for the users. So what are the things we can improve to make document management easier? So one part is the topic of metadata. In SharePoint, you have the possibility to create new site columns, of course, and then by default they're empty, but you can set default values for those things. You can set them directly when you create the new field, or the another option is, depending on where you put your content within a folder structure, you can set certain metadata, but you can also create Power Automate flows that create and set the metadata as needed. And then if you start playing around with this defaulting of information, you will benefit with the search to be able to slice and dice your content while trying to find certain things. And I know we've always been preaching this in the past, use metadata, you don't need folders. We've been talking about this for a very long time, and it's still not happening. People just feel comfortable when creating folders and folders and folders to organize and structure their content. So it's fine, use those folders, but what I've experienced is the more you standardize folder structures, the better, because then you have a common understanding. There's a nice scenario we have that we have several different projects running at the same time, and we've standardized our folder structure. So if I switch between projects, I find my content fairly easily. So it is a good idea to set up a standard structure so people know where to file things and where to grab things out again. And also think about permission models. Is it really necessary that everyone needs to have access to everything? It's not about not being open about it, but it's also about not overwhelming people, because the more you open up, the harder it becomes to finding the right content, because it's more you have to dig through and to find the right things. A nice thing that Microsoft has is hub sites. So it's more or less of virtually bringing together site collections like communication sites, which was the main driver. But I think, and it's proven very helpful, that we can also club our Teams site collections into a hub site, because then you have a unified experience also within the SharePoint world. So you have a common navigation, you have a common search experience, and you benefit from these things. I'll show you how that'll look like. And of course, the big topic when it comes to document management is being able to find the content. Actually, I should have called that tile find and not search. So because we're capturing metadata, because the search is so powerful now with all the AI stuff going in the background, trying to capture the right metadata to be able to search for it, if you play around with configuring very business case specific search scenarios, because you know the business, they always have a certain client ID and they want to just be able to search by this number. Why not create a search for it? And also a very important topic is moving content. There are still a lot of users that say, okay, I know I have to move my content from this team to that team. So I just grab everything, download it into machine, and then upload it back into the new team. Works for Office documents if you have custom metadata. Not helpful when you have PDFs or other non-Microsoft documents because you then lose your metadata. So this is more of educating your users to show them that within SharePoint and Teams, you can fairly easily say move to and move it to the new destination. And all the stuff, including the history, is kept when you move it. And that's also very important. So let's talk about this topic of hub sites. As I said, and you can see here, these dark boxes here are all Teams / SharePoint sites. So when you join these teams to this hub site, and hub site is something that your central IT has to enable for specific site collection, you can join this hub site, and then you have this virtual group together, and you have the possibility of being able to have a unified search across all of these teams. And also something we've found helpful for our projects, and the scenario I'm going to show you is that, let's say we're working in with different medias. And so for each of our medias like BBC, CNN, we create a new team, and we have a lot of project initiatives going on. And for each of these projects, we create a channel within those teams. And this is reflected by these yellow boxes. So every time we have a new project, there's a central request that then handles this request, creates the project, and actually pre-creates the folder structure, presets the metadata. And once that is done, the user is good to go to just upload the data, and the metadata is trickled down automatically. And of course, you can create your own home pages, other content pages as you need. With the hub sites, there's a little bit of the drawback that you can't have multi-structure. I think Microsoft is already working on this, so you can't have a hub site of a hub site. But it doesn't really matter, because you can say, okay, we have 2 hub sites. In our media case, we have the tech media and we have the news media, and they're their own little worlds. But because we can set permissions in SharePoint, we can grant everyone read access to all of these backing SharePoint sites and just have a unified search a level higher up. So I'm more or less virtually creating another layer where people can have a single point of entry when grabbing the content from all the things flying around. And you don't really need to know that these teams exist, because you will just get the search results here at the top hierarchy. So it's mimicking a multi-hierarchy layer system. Okay, enough about the talking. So let me show you what I'm going to show you then live. So what we've done is, for each of our team spaces, we've defined a minimum set of metadata for all our projects, which is, we know who the client is, we know what the project name is, and we also want to know who the implementing organization is within our organization. And we were also playing around with content types. So when you upload a document, you can set a content type. If you like, you can even automate that part to help people set the content types. And here, this is a nice functionality behind the scenes in SharePoint, that when you open the document library settings, you have the possibility of setting default values. And each folder, you can actually set default values. So what I've done is, on document library level, I say every document here will be assigned client BBC. And the implementing organization for this specific project initiative for this channel is marketing, and the project name is campaign June 2020. Because I'm doing this, every document I upload will have this metadata. So when I search, I can grab all the documents with this metadata. which then results in a search I specifically designed for our business case that I want to be able to have a listing of all the documents I have access to, and I'll be able to drill down based on, okay, I know who the client is, or I know who the project was. I can filter left-hand side, or just to do a free text search here and go and search. So this is where I can search through all the workspaces we have in one user interface. And also something that we found very helpful is that I can also create a search page that just returns me all the teams that are actually connected to my hub site. It's a fairly simple search query, but it's been very helpful because sometimes we just don't have the overview even in Teams, or if people don't use Teams, be able in SharePoint to see which are all the connected sites, which are all the clients I have for my hub site. So in Teams, it reflects that every client we have will have its separate team. We have our channels, our campaigns, and we can also create these search pages and pin them as tabs here. Same here, we see the document the folder structure here as well. And again, just pin that page here. Okay, let's look at this live. So I'll jump into Teams. And let's say I want to create a new team. I'll build it from scratch. I want to be as private. I'll call it ABC News. I'll skip that. I'll just have the team to myself. So I can go into, it's not provisioned yet. Sometimes it'll take some time to provision. And it's there. It's amazing how fast these things go now. And so here I see the backing SharePoint site. I'll just add a couple of columns. If the click lets me do it. Hello. Yes, now. For instance, I'll set a field called demo client name. And this is just me being pedantic about naming conventions in SharePoint. I always try to create a technical name and I have to change it into a more user-friendly display name because it helps a lot when you play around with search. This is just my own personal best practice. It makes my life a lot easier when trying to troubleshoot. Okay, so now let me show you how you can set this default metadata for these two. Here you have the setting called default value settings. Let me maybe zoom in a little more. And here, depending on the level, I can set different things. So here I can say the client name is ABC News. So this is now the manual way, just for you to understand what's going to happen afterwards when you do it in an automated way. And on the general channel, I'll use that now. I can say project name, set a default value, general. And now once we go back to the document library and upload some sample documents. Now I wanted to upload it in the channel. See here, it's automatically set me this metadata. So anyone who's now collaborating here will automatically inherit this metadata. Also to show you, we can set permissions for certain users to be able to find content. So what I'll do is share it. And this depends on the level where you want to share things. So I created a group called SharePoint Read All in theory. Okay, then I'll just have, I know there's a user called Alex. And I can just share that link and grant him access to that document. So I think this is fairly straightforward. Let me show you a couple of other spaces I've created before. So for instance, in my teams, I have the BBC project. I have the campaign in June. And you can see I pre-provisioned some folder structures when I requested my project. And I've also inherited the metadata. So now in Teams, I can also see this metadata, and I have access to all the SharePoint views. This is really helpful, and it's been released in the last couple of months. So you can then again have a similar look and feel and experience as in SharePoint. So all these things are more or less loosely coupled. I have access to all these teams. But here I have this hub site team, and I've pinned these 2 tabs, as I told you, where I'm able to now slice and dice between my different projects. So here I have a couple of projects already, so I can slice here. And I know the document type, it must have been a project plan. And here I go, I have the information. So just by setting this metadata, it makes it far easier for the user to then access the content. I still have the full text search to be able to find the things as well, and then I can just continue refining. So I have different possibilities just because I have metadata, I've set permissions, and configured search, custom search user interfaces. And again, based on search, I just created an overview of all the teams. And also part of the provisioning process is that every user in my organization will have read access to all the content in SharePoint, not in Teams, so we don't overwhelm everyone. But again, I have a specific search that will show me all the teams I have access to quickly jump into the SharePoint content at least. So I'd like to show you this with a user I created. Here you see the user sees all of these teams here in the search, but in reality, he doesn't have access to all of them. So you see this one here, Wiener Zeitung, it's an Austrian newspaper. Oh no, he does have access here. Sorry, I'm trying to find the right one. The Hello World, for instance. Yeah, he doesn't have access to Hello World in Teams, but he still has access to the content. So it's again, think about also making it easier for the users and not overwhelming them. It's okay if they have access to the documents because they want to grab sample project documentation. But they don't need to collaborate in Teams. That's fine. You just have to think about the use case. OK, let's jump back to the slides and briefly talk about how can we automate all these manual things of creating teams, creating channels, setting permissions, because it's just cumbersome if you have to do that manually over and over again. So there are many different technologies. I will show you a fairly simple scenario, of course. Just to demonstrate you that it is possible, but you then have to pick the most suitable technology stack for yourself. Basically, you have the options of using Azure Functions, web jobs, so anything that can execute some code to provision your stuff. What is also really nice is instead of using Power Automate, I've used Logic Apps to handle the request process. So you send a request into a SharePoint list, the Logic app kicks in, and then sends that work process to an Azure function to process. And I still have this SharePoint Designer workflow here. I must say, it is still convenient in some cases. I know it's been disabled more and more, but we've come across some scenarios just in recent weeks where SharePoint Designer was far more reliable than Power Automate. It's probably not future-proof, but it served its purpose in that moment where it was critical. A really nice technology, really worth looking into is the PMP provisioning engine and the PMP modern search. So the PMP provisioning engine we're using in this scenario to set up SharePoint. So we're creating content types, we're creating site columns, we're setting up the search configuration with crawled properties, managed properties, to then be able to have a nice search experience with the PMP modern search web parts, to then be able to slice and dice the stuff. You can also use the Graph API to interact with Teams. In my case, I consciously opted out. I will explain to you in the next slide. Because an important thing is when you talk about automation is you have to think about how you authenticate and authorize your job that is running against Teams, against SharePoint. There are several different options, like you have an AAD app, which you grant access to the Graph API. You have Office CLI, you have the possibility to create a simple service account with username and password, or to create a SharePoint app. Creating an AID app and granting permissions to the Graph API for us was not an option because it opens up security vulnerabilities. Because if I have a small business unit that has a scenario which doesn't need to know about any other teams, with the Graph API, I grant that AID app access to all the teams. So security-wise, not the best option. Same, and this is again just specific for the scenario we had. We can also use the Office CLI, would also mean admin access. Did not work. The fourth option with the SharePoint app, great, but only SharePoint part, and we want to do more. So the option we went for is the service account. So it's actually just basically a normal user account, username, password, license, and you use that specifically to create a new team. It's just a normal standard user. It doesn't have elevated permissions, but because he's the owner, he can do far more. Okay, let's have a look at what happens here. So also here in this hub site, we've created a workspace request. It's not the fanciest, but it proves the concept. Here the user has the possibility to either create a new client workspace, which is basically a team, or a new project, which is a channel within a workspace. So here I'll create a new workspace. And I call it daily news. Oops, German English keyword. News. I'm the owner. And we'll have some members, which is Alex. And I think there was a Johnny. Yes, perfect. And then the request is done. Here you can have 15 different approval process steps if you like. So you can have a nice governance process if necessary. And now what happens? The the Logic app kicks in, which I will show you. Let me open my Logic app, which we've connected to the SharePoint list. So when an item is created, we check, are we requesting client workspace or project space? This is based on the content type. At the moment, we're talking about a client workspace. So what we'll do is actually just call the Azure function, parse the response, and the response is that we'll have a SharePoint URL and a team ID sent back, and we'll capture that with the initial request just for ease of access and also for processing project requests. So now looking at the Azure function, what happens is that we receive this HTTP request with the parameters we need. Whoop, Azure Functions, a lot of clicking here. Code and test. I still haven't quite gotten used to the new UI of the Azure Functions. So we get the client name, we get the owners and the members. And I've hard-coded some of these values. Of course, they would have to move to a configuration file, but again, for the easiness of trying to explain to you how it works, we capture which is the hub site we want to join, where's the schema we want to import. This is where the PMP provisioning engine comes into play. This is something that is stored in our hub site as a schema XML, which will create content types, search configuration, and things like that. We also capture the hub site ID. And what we've also done now is that, as I said, we want to have everyone be able to read all of the content of the SharePoint documents, but not in Teams. So what we're doing is setting read access in SharePoint site collection. So this is where we got this one. And the ID group was called Demo All Staff and not SharePoint All Staff. So that's why it went wrong. Okay, we authenticate against the Teams and against SharePoint Online. We check if the team already exists. If not, we throw an exception. So we create the team. We add the owners and the members. I hate adding sleeps to scripts, but in this case, we just have to wait until Teams has finished provisioning everything. And then we do the SharePoint part. So we apply the schema, the SharePoint schema. We set our default values. As I mentioned, we have this field called client. We set this to default value, so every document you upload will have this default value. Yeah, we apply the schema. We set the permissions on that site collection to read. So everyone in that group will have read access to all the teams. Content, no, not to teams, to SharePoint content, sorry. And here we just pre-create some folders in the general channel. And the final thing is that we can connect this newly created team/SharePoint site to our hub site. So we've done a lot of steps we used to do manually in the previous demo, and this now fully happens in an automated way. So now when I switch over, here we already have the daily news set up for us. And if we click on files, we have our existing folder structure. And again, I can just grab some documents, upload them over here. And we already have the metadata as needed. In the general channel, we don't have a project set because we haven't requested a project. So now let's say we want to create a project. Sorry, let me switch back over here. Very similar scenario. We create a, sorry, that was the wrong one. We request a client project space, title campaign 2020. We tell them which workspace to use. So we just created the daily news. We say marketing is responsible for this. Save. And the request goes through. Sorry, I was just distracted trying to check if there aren't any questions at the moment. So then again, we have our logic app that kicks in here in the second stream. And here we're actually using the logic apps because I was trying to test to see how far we can get with Teams. To be honest, I still like to script. Logic apps is fun to click, but it's just very cumbersome when you try to send right HTTP requests. Not everything is supported yet, but so you create the new channel as part of the logic app. We pre-create some folders, and then at some point we just then revert back to an Azure function that provisions additional information. I think primarily setting permissions. Let me double check here, provision project. I think it's it's a very short script here. We're setting the default values for project name and implementing organizational unit. And we're setting permissions because there's a specific folder which is only really for internal purposes or for a specific group of people. So let's see how fast we were with the creation. No, sometimes the logic apps are fairly fast and sometimes it takes a while. Yeah, but basically we'll create a channel like this and pre-create the folder structure. Yes, one very nice thing as well is what we've introduced. What I also find helpful is actually enforcing hub site policies. So let's say people are able to join your hub site. Again, joining hub sites, you can have certain flow, Power Automates for approvals, etc. But what we're also doing is for every team that's joined your hub site, we want to enforce certain rules, such as setting the permissions to read all for everyone in the SharePoint site collection. And there's a really nice functionality when you use search. So what I do is actually I use the search to grab me all the sites which have this property set department ID. So everyone who's joined the hub site will inherit the hub site ID of the hub site. So this is why I can easily have this dashboard over here, because the search this one basically says, give me all the sites that are joined to the hub site. And that's the query. So we can use this script that runs every 2 hours to just enforce all the permissions and settings we would require for a site to join. Maybe quickly a few words about the search. So as I said, this is the PMP Modern Search, and it's fairly straightforward. I've not customized anything. I just configured search queries. So as I said, this is also a fairly simple query. So here you can see I've hard-coded this to say everything which within my hub, everything that's a site, but not my own hub site, give me the results back. Also, what is actually probably more interesting for you is this here. So here on the left-hand side, we have these filters. These filters are based on my managed properties I've set through this provisioning schema. And then I can just say here, okay, I want to have created. I want to have the content types available for users to refine. And then now we have our custom properties, which I map to refinable string 0, 0, 1, and 0, 2. And this is how I can then fairly easily set. When I honestly, this was work about 5 to 10 minutes, me struggling with the right typing. But it's really 5 minutes if you have the metadata set to just create a very good user experience for your business case. Yes, so let's switch back to the slides and start wrapping up. So what you just saw is that I showed you how you can create a workflow to create workspaces and projects. I know this is against the objective of self-service, but it really depends to which extent you're preventing people from self-service. Because if you have a self-service that still triggers everything automatically and the user gets an email after 5 minutes because everything has been created, I don't think it's that much of a drawback. We use the logic apps to do the processing of this request and the Azure Functions for the provisioning. It can also be a web job or any other type of script execution engine. Keep in mind, Azure Functions has a limit of 10 minutes of execution time, which can be painful. And we've also used the Azure Function to enforce our policies on Teams and SharePoint if we have any. A few thoughts and quick wins. So find a small business case where you know people are struggling with document management on a day-to-day basis. It's not about coming up with an overall concept for everyone in your organization, because there are always pain points for very specific cases, because they have very different things to achieve. So you can't have one fits all. Some people search for clients, others look for IDs, others are interested in projects. You have to find the best fit. I know it's a lot of work, but you will benefit on the long run. Have a look at setting default metadata. It's all, even though if it's manual on one document library, it's still very fast to set. Also very helpful is adding tabs to your hub sites or to all of your other teams to pin either search possibilities you've created in SharePoint. It's just adding a website and you have your search embedded within your teams. Same of pinning your documents which are relevant and important for that specific context in your channel. Also, don't clutter yourself with teams. It is overwhelming. In my company's teams, I honestly joined too many teams, and it's my own fault. But what I do try is to at least hide them, or if the project is finished, go and archive them to just reduce the clutter, at least within teams. What is a nice functionality is there's still a lot of communications going on in Outlook. At some point, maybe start transitioning, forward your email to a channel, continue communication there. The system extracts attachments and stores the emails there, and then you can continue processing it over there. The nice thing about the hub site is it's a single point of access. As I showed you, you can create search pages that surface an overview of everything that is relevant for the user. It can just be a listing of my recent documents or all my teams I have joined, etc. Something that is very helpful is standardizing channels and libraries, pre-creating folder structures. I know it's cumbersome because people think I want to be more flexible, but think of the others as well who join the teams, who keep switching between teams. It's really hard with the context switching if you have to rethink the way the others are thinking. Create hub sites. So create your hub site, go to IT, request to make this a hub site, and then you can start joining that hub site to have this unified experience. Another thing that is nice, and if you're keen on Power BI, if you set metadata, if you know how to use the Search REST API, you can create Power BI reports based on all the documents you have access to. It's more or less a simple search query, and then you can just populate Power BIs. A nice thing is, and I honestly have not looked into it in detail, but I think Project Cortex could be really helpful when it comes to struggling with metadata. So if you have a lot of standard documents, maybe it's worth looking into that. I think the approach I proposed is cheaper, because I'm pretty sure that Project Cortex is not the cheapest option, but it is very, very powerful and can help you very fast. Some final thoughts. Try to just implement quick wins, and it's really about setting up a search. You don't even have to work with metadata, but set up a search where, you know, I don't know, you filter by Word documents, you filter by videos, you work with the existing metadata and make it available for the end users. Also accept that some people are willing to work in teams, others still feel more comfortable in SharePoint, and because you can pin SharePoint search pages in Teams, you can create one thing in SharePoint and reuse it in Teams. And some people are still used to working the file system, and just sync the files down and it will automatically sync it back. And even if you drag and drop a file there, it will be uploaded to SharePoint and the metadata will be set again. So all three are valid and will work ideally. A very important message, which I stumble across very often, is I have a file system, can we just drag and drop everything into Teams? Yes, we can, but we're just copying the big amount of data. Again, there are documents that haven't been touched in years. Consider and think, do you really need to migrate everything? Because again, it's about reducing, I don't want to say the clutter, but the buzz. They try to keep the important documents, the live documents in Teams, and maybe migrate the others to a different SharePoint site collection, mark that as archive. Again, create maybe a unified search where people can have a joint search if they can't find something. But consider these things, how you can make it easier for users to find the right things without overcluttering them. And also something, train your users to use the Office tools efficiently, because a lot of users don't know that you can, instead of saying save as desktop and then upload, you can say save directly into SharePoint. It's just, again, user training, getting them to adopt to how Microsoft works. One last slide. Kudos to my team. I think we came up with a great solution. Of course, the thing I showed you is a small set scenario, but I do hope it will help you in the long run. Thank you very much. I hope you could take away a couple of thoughts that will help you also to work with document management in Teams and SharePoint, and I've hopefully lifted some